Welcome to the eCommerce Profits Podcast, where we feature top founders and experts in the e-commerce industry and take an in-depth look at the struggles and successes in growing e-commerce brands profitably.
All right, what's good, people? Welcome back to the e-commerce Profits Podcast. With us today, we have a third-time returning guest. Is it a third time?
I'm pretty sure it's the third time, yeah.
Ben Leonard. Ben is the founder of Ecom Brokers, and that's ecombrokers.co.uk. Ben, you're at the forefront of the action that is the M&A world in e-commerce. Let's kick it off with your outlook, general sentiment on things with deal activity in the midst of possibly a looming economic recession. And how things are panning out in Europe and in the US. What's your take?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, okay, cool. So yeah, good to be back and thanks for having me. It's been pretty wild the last year and a bit. Prior to 2022, 2020, 2021, we saw a lot of crazy stuff going on in mergers and acquisitions in e-commerce. We saw a lot of pretty average, sometimes pretty poor businesses being sold for lots of money. Very high multiples of EBITDA. And that was really because of a combination of COVID and the macroeconomic environment. Of course, those two things were very tightly linked anyway. And the behavior of the buyers. So many of the buyers in the e-commerce space are private equity backed aggregators of brands. They are rolling up e-commerce businesses into a portfolio. And the business model is cash flow arbitrage, right? So they're buying profit at a low multiple, let's just say 2.5 to 3 times profit. And then within their portfolio, all the brands that they buy are worth more than the sum of their parts. They sit at a much higher multiple, say more like, 7, 8, 9, 10, even up to 15x. And then they optimize those businesses to improve the profitability. And the idea is that they'll eventually sell them on or go public.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was, as sales around COVID went crazy and we saw this boom in e-commerce, those guys and the investors in them banked on that continuing. They banked on, right, this has been the big change that we've been looking for. And now everyone's coming to e-commerce and these sales are going to stay high. And therefore they threw a ton of money at it and they bought loads of brands for lots of money to see what would stick. But of course, that's not what happened, right? The COVID shopping spree ended. Sales fell. We saw lots of issues with supply and demand due to factory closures. We saw issues with shipping prices. And essentially the macroeconomic environment changed. So these buyers could no longer get money dirt cheap. And as a result, we shifted from a seller's market to more of a buyer's market where it's much more difficult to sell your business. Your multiples have been much lower. And whereas previously someone with a pretty average e-commerce business could probably sell it for a lot of money, now we're seeing a situation where only really strong brands are able to sell their business. And it's been a huge shift. A lot of people are frustrated now because they're in a position where they can't sell their business or can't sell it for as much as they would have liked. And a lot of people are still feeling quite smug because they have a fantastic business and they've been following my advice, which is to build a strong brand so that as we come out of this situation, they're much better able to sell
it. If I were running a strong brand and I follow exactly what you taught and things are going well despite the economic climate, and I'm not in a hurry to sell the business, what's your advice for someone like that? Would you wait it out until the cycle kind of comes back, or would you still say it's still a good time?
My advice is find out what your business is worth. And then you're in a position to make an informed decision because people are often surprised as to what their business could be worth. They have either over or underestimated that in their own thinking. And then when they get a better view from a third party, an independent third party and experts, then they're better able to make an informed decision as to, right, okay, this is actually worth more than I thought. And I'm at a point in my life where it makes sense for me to get serious about an exit strategy sooner than I thought. Or they might say, I've still got some work to do, but now I'm in a better position to understand, okay, this is where I am. This is where I need to get to. And then you work with the right experts to reverse engineer your exit and get you where you need to be. So my advice is find out what your business could be worth so that you have that information at your fingertips.
Interesting. Now, in a scenario where I'm running a business, an e-commerce business, that's fair relatively well, but still kind of not ready to sell. I'm considering what an exit might look like when the cycle kind of comes back into a more favorable one for sellers. What should I do in the next 12 to 18 to 24 months in order to best prepare for an opportunity like that?
The answer is it depends. There's lots of things you could and should do. And it depends on where your business is now and what your goals are. So we could take a few different angles at this. So let's begin with the first one that I'd like to look at, which is thinking about when I get to the point that the deal is done, what is it that's going to get the deal over the line? Because it's over. A lot of people make the mistake of asking themselves or focusing on themselves. They're thinking about, I'm going to sell my business and this is how much I'm going to sell it for. But of course, you selling your business is contingent on somebody else buying it, right? Because it's a deal.
Yeah.
So we have to think about, well, what's going to get it over the line? In other words, what matters to a potential buyer? And in our view, there are 5 key things that we need to make sure we focus on as we're preparing to exit that put us in the shoes of a buyer. And I like to imagine these in the form of a pyramid. And it's actually like a Mayan pyramid, so not an Egyptian pyramid. So imagine you've got a Mayan pyramid with 5 layers. You've got brand at the bottom, then growth and profitability, then risk, then transferability, and then documentation. And these 5 things represent the 5 most important factors to a potential buyer. And the lower down the pyramid they are, the more important they are. So if you remove lower layers, things are going to come tumbling down. Now, you don't have to have all of these layers to be able to sell your business, but you're going to need at least 3. And the most important ones are brand at the bottom and then growth and profitability. And the reason for that is that brand really matters, right? With no brand identity, there's no hook, no excitement, no following, no repeat custom, no word of mouth, no pride in your business from a legion of fans who'll buy all your stuff. Because remember, buyers want a sustainable business that's going to last. They want a business that has growth potential. They want intellectual property and they want repeat custom. So a brand is a very easy way for us to think about getting all of that. And if you just have an online business that really it either literally has no brand identity and just selling stuff, then you don't have that. Or if you have a weak brand identity, some sort of pseudo brand, you just slap dash put a logo on something, that's not a brand.
How do you measure that, Ben? And hold on, let's take a backtrack a little bit. What's a Mayan pyramid? How is that different from an Egyptian pyramid?
An Egyptian pyramid. If you imagine you climbed to the top of an Egyptian pyramid and then sat down, you'd slide all the way to the bottom, right? It's smooth.
Yeah.
A Mayan pyramid is like steps, like stairs.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's an easy way to like represent the layers, right? You just have these 5 distinct layers. Whereas with an Egyptian pyramid, there's nothing really distinct about it.
Yeah. Makes sense.
No distinct layers. Yeah.
So how do you measure a brand?
That we use. So brand, there's lots of different definitions of brand, right? And really many of them are right. But the one that I really like is a brand is a group of products that solve problems for a particular group of people. So if you are selling products to arts and crafts enthusiasts, and perhaps we get even more niche, perhaps it's knitting enthusiasts, right?
Right.
Then that's a brand. And it's defined by the people that you're serving.
Right.
And branding is how you make people feel about your brand. And the way you make people feel about your brand. You achieve that, whatever you're trying to make them feel, through your marketing, in my opinion.
Mm,
And this is
interesting.
why it's so important, right? To consider, a lot of people are like, what, wait, this guy's supposed to be talking about mergers and acquisitions. Why are we talking about brand and marketing? Because it matters, right? It's not just about taking, there are people in this space who are mergers and acquisitions experts in bricks and mortar businesses and have now tried to get into e-commerce, but they don't understand e-commerce. They don't understand branding and marketing and digital marketing. And so all they're doing is taking a trailing 12-month profit and multiplying it by 3 and saying that's what your business is worth, without really understanding what are all the ins and outs of this business and deeply understanding everything about it, from the operations through to the marketing, and thinking about how can we set this up so that it is as attractive as possible to a buyer.
No, I want to unpack that a little bit. Um, how do you think about the inputs to building a brand? And this is coming from someone who is, I'd say, from a branding point of view, I am nowhere near an expert.
Mm,
I would, I'd say I tend to associate closer to the direct response crowd, if you
mm,
will, and I tend to think about marketing investments as, for every dollar that I spend, I need an ROI that's measurable within a certain time period. And if I
yep,
don't see that, I feel uneasy and I feel terrible. So I'm pretty sure that I have some kind of a blind spot to the topic in terms of what exactly branding is and how it relates to marketing and how you measure that and what are the inputs that come into picture and what builds branding and brand.
sure.
So
So,
yeah.
and then I'll try and answer this, and then I'll try and keep it relevant to selling your business and preparing it for sale. So ultimately, it comes back to the definition of a brand, which as I said before, is a group of products that solve problems for a particular group of people. So does that therefore mean that I can pick a niche and then grab a group of products and slap a logo on it? Or does it mean that I don't, if I don't have a brand, if you're listening to this and you don't have a strong brand identity, can you just slap a logo on something? No, the answer is no. The first step, the first input to come back to your question then, in my opinion, is quality products. Seth Godin, who's like the godfather of all of these things, teaches us that quality products are marketing, right?
Mm,
You can't outmarket a crap product,
yeah.
and you can't build a brand based on a suite of crap products. So the first step is to have great products, right? And they won't, in some ways they'll market themselves.
Yeah.
Then it's to develop a brand identity. Well, how do you do that? Well, that's opening a huge can of worms, but really it's asking who your audience is, deeply
Hmm.
understanding them, and going through a bunch of exercises to probably build a customer avatar and
Yeah.
then build a brand avatar to reflect those customers. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about building a brand. And so then to bring this back into to selling your business, when you have all that, you have this longevity, this sustainability, the repeat custom, the legions of fans who will buy new products. You have these routes to growth because um, you have the customers who will buy your new products. You already have a basis on which to grow your business into new markets, new channels, etc. Whereas without a brand, you're really just stuff, selling stuff on the internet. And that isn't going to tick the boxes that a buyer wants, right?
Hmm.
And these layers in this pyramid that I described are all interrelated. So having a brand, right, a strong brand at the bottom of the pyramid, not only is that layer in and of itself very important, but that will then strengthen the other layers. So a strong brand will allow your business to have more growth potential and be
Hmm.
more profitable. A strong brand de-risks your business. A strong brand is transferable because a buyer wants to pick up your brand and drop it into their existing system.
Hmm.
So I think to come back to I think it was like your very first question. What should you be thinking about? It's these
Yeah.
things. It's putting yourself in the buyer's shoes, right?
Yeah.
That's where we are. But then there's other things to think about. So, for instance, somebody might say, well, should I focus on top line revenue or should
Mm.
I focus on profitability? Well, the answer is it depends. And it depends on a couple of things. One, it depends on where you are, how far out you are. If you're looking to sell in the next 12, 18 months, then you want to maximize profitability, but you don't want to dramatically impede your top line revenue growth. But you are
Mm.
looking to maximize profitability because ultimately that is the metric on which we're going to value the business. However, if you're further out, then growing top line makes more sense, and then you would pivot to a strategy that focuses on profitability later.
Right.
It's also fair to say that there's these like invisible levels in e-commerce at which different types of buyers will become interested. So, for example, a private equity buyer, a big private equity buyer, we're not talking about aggregators here, we're talking about the level above them, the private equity who actually funds the aggregators themselves.
Mm.
They're probably not going to become interested until you're doing sort of $10, $15 million of EBITDA.
Right.
So if you are on the cusp of one of these sort of levels, if you like,
Mm-hmm.
then you're going to be focusing on profitability to get your profits up into that kind of bracket, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. Interesting. At the end of the day, valuation, I presume for most e-commerce businesses, are based off EBITDA. Am I right to say that?
Yes, but the multiple will change based off a variety of factors. So, for example, we might have two businesses both doing $1 million in EBITDA, both in the same kind of niche. One is growing much faster than the other, so the multiple applied to the high growth one is going to be higher. One might have a stronger brand identity than the other, so the multiple for the strong brand will be higher. So although we use the EBITDA or FTE as the basis for the valuation, the multiple will change depending on all sorts of factors.
Makes sense. Makes sense. What are some of the coolest transactions that you have seen in recent times or have been a part of that you could share about?
Yeah, absolutely. There was one which was super cool. This was a passion project. Husband and wife couple with really humble roots from Eastern Europe. They had created a brand in the beauty space based off of their own experiences, and solving their own problems, which is the classic way that a lot of entrepreneurs start. They're scratching their own itch.
Mm-hmm.
Husband ran the technical side, wife was the face of the brand. And through all their determination and hard work, they got to the business doing more than 10 million in revenue, more than a couple of million in profit. And we ended up selling that for them for life-changing amounts of money, right? It doesn't take a mathematics expert to work out if they're doing just over 2 million in profit, right? And we sold it for something in the region of north of 6x. Not only did it change their lives, but the lives of their entire extended families where they're from.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to get into too much detail for obvious reasons. So that illustrates the life-changing impact of e-commerce, which I find fantastic. What I love about e-commerce and why I love working in it every day is it is now a level playing field. People with no business experience can get into e-commerce based on a variety of free tools, free and cheap education available to us, which not that long ago we couldn't get into. But that doesn't mean that I'm only excited about the big projects, right? So, one awesome project we worked on, business that we sold, was doing only about 125,000 in profit. And despite it being really small, it's one of my favorites because the owner, his name was John, he'd been on holiday in Bali and discovered this factory making brass fittings for bathrooms and kitchens. And this factory had no commercial sense. They had
Yeah.
artistic talent, but no commercial ability. And he started taking suitcases of this stuff back home and selling it on eBay. He quickly realized that the products not only were they cheaper than the Chinese stuff, but also like 5 times the quality. They're way better.
Yeah.
So he put together an exclusive deal with this factory. No other factory in Indonesia is doing this kind of stuff. He completely cornered the market and absolutely crushed it in ecstasy. So then we sold his business for about 5x, and
Interesting.
he bought a yacht and he's sailing around the world somewhere with his dog. Right?
5x at a net
Yes,
profit of,
yes.
wow, okay. That's a
Because
great outcome.
this is what matters, right? People will say, Ben, what are multiples like at the moment? And I will say, well, it depends. Because sure, you can say right now that generally speaking in e-commerce, multiples are between 3 and 4.
Yeah.
Generally. But every business is different. We did another deal a short time ago, about 190 grand SDE for just over 5x. And people were like, that's a very high multiple. Well, yes, but there were very specific details about that business that made it very attractive to the buyer. And that buyer very particularly wanted to buy that business.
Interesting.
On the other hand, we might sell a business doing significantly more, say, I don't know, 700,000 SDE for a lower multiple, because
Yep.
there are factors that mean that is what it was worth to the buyer.
Hmm.
Remember, it's a deal about getting it over the line. There's
Yeah.
give and take on each side. You can't have everything you want. And
Yeah.
oftentimes you can have the numbers you want, but you won't necessarily therefore get the terms in the deal that you want in terms of the deal structure, for instance,
Makes
and
sense.
vice versa.
For the for the business that's making multiple millions in EBITDA, and you sold it for 6x, what did the process look like? Were you looking out for multiple buyers and going to when you went to market, or were you going in like a linear fashion? What was the strategy and what made it work?
Our job is to put the business into its best possible state for an exit and then market it to the right buyers. So that's really important. So you want to bring as many of the right buyers to the table as possible. It can vary from business to business, depending on the complexities and individual nature of that business, and also the business owners and what they want.
Right.
For this particular deal, we ended up with, we went through a process of having, we had 5 indications of interest, which are not quite the same as a letter of interest or a letter of intent. A letter of
Okay.
intent is the next stage.
Yep.
Oftentimes the indication of interest stage doesn't happen, but we chose to do this because we wanted to get this absolutely right for this particular deal. An indication of interest is, you've presented the business under NDA to a potential buyer, and they have expressed in a completely non-binding way at a relatively high level, this is the type of deal would be prepared to offer. Soft negotiation takes place, and then a letter of intent will be submitted by the potential buyer, which is
Right.
a letter, it's a non-binding letter that says, we'd like to buy your business. Please agree to grant us X days, typically these days about 45 to 90 even, to conduct our due diligence. And you
Right.
agree, please, not to sell your business during that time.
Mm.
So at that point, you can only go under LOI with one party at a time. So
Yep.
you're whittling down your indications of interest to your letter of intent, some stop negotiation, and then agreeing broadly on some terms. The deals, the letter of intent is signed, and you go into the due diligence period. Then the buyer conducts their due diligence on turning every stone and looking at every nook and cranny of your business. And then they're going to put in their formal offer to buy the business in the form of either an asset purchase agreement or a share purchase agreement, depending on whether you're selling the actual legal entity of the business or you're just selling the brand.
Makes sense. Now, when you're at that final stage,
looking for buyers and marketing the business, do you always go for multiple buyers on the table, or has there been instances where it's just one buyer, it's perfect, let's make this happen?
Yeah, 100%. There are times when you know from your existing network
Yep.
exactly who would be a great buyer. You present it to them. At the same time, you're quite likely to present it to other parties, of course, because you are, in order to do your best job for the seller, we're representing the seller at the end of the day. You need to cast as wide a net as possible.
Yeah.
However, there's also other factors to balance, like how quickly does the seller want to get the deal done, right? And also, who's going to be the best buyer for the business? Because remember, depending on the deal structure, it could be that a significant portion of the money that the seller is going to eventually get is based on how well the business performs in the hands of a new owner. So you want to make sure that the new owner actually has the operational capability to run the thing. But there have been times that we have presented a business to a buyer that we are highly certain is the right buyer for that business. We've also shown it to some others, but in the end, that buyer has immediately come back and said yes, very quickly submitted an LOI, and the seller has accepted that LOI without even looking at other offers. That does happen.
Interesting.
But we'll only let that happen if we believe that that is in the best interest of the seller. We're not going to cut off opportunities to look at other offers. That would be negligent.
Makes sense. This is interesting because typically, the well, what I've learned ancillary from just people who do deals is that you typically not want to take an offer when the only offer on the table is the one that you have.
That's not necessarily true. And for some people, remember that the market has changed. So for some people, they don't really have a choice. Well, they always have a choice. They can either they can not sell their business.
Fair enough.
But
Yeah.
sometimes you only get one offer. That's not the ideal world, but that is the reality. And I think it's important to let people know that can be the case. But that doesn't mean that first of all, you don't want the buyer to know that. But also, it doesn't mean that the buyer is going to submit a poor offer because they know that you could just turn it down.
Yeah.
And there could be very good reasons why there's only one offer, right? It could be that you do have a good business, but it's not a right fit for other buyers at this time for a variety of reasons. Or there's one buyer in particular who really wants to buy your business because it is a perfect bolt-on to what they're already doing, or they actually need to deploy a certain amount of capital before the end of the financial year, for instance. Lots of reasons.
Fair enough. Now, quick segue.
Sure.
What are you doing on a personal basis? Are you taking on investments? Are you investing in DTC brands yourself? I know that you're also in an operator's seat, but what's that like? Since you're looking at so many deals and what's happening in the market, I figured you have an advantage over folks like me.
So I co-own a sports brand. The situation there was my co-founder pitched me. So he was my competitor. He paid me for some consulting. We became friends. He pitched me on investing in the new business, and he runs the day-to-day ops, and I mentor him. So that's one thing. I'm developing another brand in the background, which is not launching yet, and we'll do a Kickstarter later in the year. That's in the parent and baby space. And then I have minority equity stakes in a couple of other brands in exchange for mentoring. Acquisition wise, it's not something that I've done lately. There's actually a deal that I'm looking at. And yeah, those are the things that I'm up to at the minute.
How do you structure a mentorship equity type arrangement?
Sure. It's pretty straightforward. So it could be cash and equity. So they might pay a retainer, but also you take X% in the business. Let's just call it 20%. Or it could be purely equity. So you put together a pretty straightforward contract with the expectations on either party, and you're gonna provide mentoring. So that could be based on a set number of hours, or it could be a bit looser than that, depending on your relationship with this person. In exchange for equity. So one way that you do it is actually you don't actually take on, in the very beginning, you might take a very, very, very small share, like nothing or 1%.
Mm-hmm.
And then the business effectively owes you, for the mentoring. And then so that's a debt that the business owes to you. And then you convert that to equity later. So
I
you're
see.
saying, right, instead of me billing you for this mentoring, we're converting it to equity. And you'd have an agreement in place that says that that's what's going to happen.
I see. And the valuation obviously would be agreed upon prior.
Very often, no. Very often, the valuation, there isn't really a formal valuation. It's
Okay.
right. If I'm going to mentor you, here's what I want.
Okay. How would you price the fees out and the equivalent equity percentage in that scenario?
You don't really do you don't do like a conversion. You don't do like, okay, so my hourly rate is, $500 and I've billed you this many hours. And based on the EBITDA, that means that I'm owed X% of the business. Doesn't work like that. It's the agreement is the agreement up front would be, I'm going to mentor you, in exchange for 20% of the business or whatever it might be.
I see. Interesting. That's really interesting.
There's a good way to do it as well, which is a really nice get out for everybody, is that you drip feed the equity. So it might be that you get X% to 2% per month, capped at say 24 months, right? Or 12 months, whatever. And anyone can get out at any time or can end the agreement. So you might, the main shareholder might end it when you get to 10%. You're now going to own 10%, but you no longer are committed to any more mentoring.
That is interesting. That's really interesting. I've toyed around with the idea of, and I've been pitched this as well as an agency, but we just never really took the deal. And I've toyed around with the idea of offering our services in exchange for equity, but in a slightly more creative fashion. So, for instance, if the market value of our services, call it 200 grand over the course of 6 months, we would half that, and which would be 100K, and would take payment in the form of equity instead of 200K in cash. And we would basically do work for free for 6 months. Nice. And it does two things at least in my mind. One, it keeps us incentivized as a shareholder with aligned interests in the purest of its definition. And at the same time, it allows for cash flow in the business, and you're not worried about marketing. You basically have a full-blown marketing team without worrying about hiring for 6 full months or 12 months or whatever that time frame might be for the business. And at the end of it,
I like it.
Everyone's happy if the outcome's great and scale happens.
No, I like that. I think that could be something that could really work. I think you need to get it right in terms of who the client is, but there's no reason that you can't make it work. And there's no, I think the way to do it is to test it in a way in which it's easy for all parties to extract themselves from it. And then maybe when you reach a critical threshold, you can tighten it. You can tighten it up so that if you're happy, you don't find that the rug is pulled from under you and they've ended things and you've invested all this effort for very little.
Makes sense. What would that look like? Would you say a termination clause with a certain period?
Yeah, something like that. So, I'm not a lawyer. Something like that. I would want to.
Hypothetically, right? Not legal advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Hypothetically, yes. And you can, what I'm a big fan of is I like to, when I'm dealing with these types of things, is I put what I want in layperson's language and give it to my lawyer. Turn this into a thing, right?
Yeah.
And they'll say, Ben, you can't do that. Or, well, we can do that, but we could do it like this. Or they say, yes, you can do this. And actually, we can make it even better for you by doing this, this, and this. And that's why I'm a huge fan of working with experts, right? You know, I'm all about bootstrapping, but on certain things, particularly legal issues, I'm always about paying experts. And this is why I'm encouraging people to pay experts to plan their exit strategy, right? You know, your business is your most valuable asset. Why on earth would you try to cut corners with that and flip it on some crappy flipping website?
Exactly.
Or with legal stuff, why on earth would you try and just download some template and do it yourself?
I agree. Yeah.
Talk to a lawyer, because actually cheap is expensive and expensive is cheap.
Yep. Let that sink in.
Sit down and think that through for a minute. Cheap is expensive, expensive is cheap. But write it down and think about why that's true.
I love that so much. We've learned that the hard way as a customer as well, because we hire agencies and we hire contractors. And often when we try to cheap on certain stuff and cut corners a little bit, we end up in a situation where we spend way more money fixing the mistake and way more time, and most importantly, mind space to rectify the issues, when we could have spent maybe twice as much.
Twice as much
initially, and saved like 80% of the overall cost.
Yeah, completely.
So, or in your case, it would be pay a little bit more upfront, but end up with an outcome that's way more exciting, way more life-changing.
Yeah, I mean, in our case, actually, it's like this. You know, we have a commission structure. So the more we sell your business for, the more we get paid.
Makes sense.
But it's a smaller percentage. So if we sell your business for $10 million, we're going to take 1.75%. We sell it for 100,000, we're going to take 12%, right? So you're not getting it gets better, right, for the seller. Yeah. But also they know that we have an incentive to sell the business for as much as we can. So they know that our goals are aligned. Yeah. And actually, it's an ROI. Like, our job is for our fees to have more than paid for themselves for all the work that we do in maximizing the value of the business, planning the exit, and then running the whole deal so that you get the right deal structure with the right buyer.
Exactly.
And that's relative to trying to go it alone or cheap out on some service that's going to devalue your business and reduce it to nothing more than a commodity on some listing website is night and day.
Love that. Final advice for people listening, to best prepare for the opportunity that is coming in the next 12, 18 months.
Yeah. Treat your business with the respect it deserves. It is not a side hustle. It is not a game on the internet. Yes, we play this on our laptops, right? And it feels sometimes it's very tempting because it's so easy for so many of us to get access to becoming an e-commerce business owner. It can feel almost gamified, but it's not. We're talking about real businesses and large amounts of money. So treat your business with the respect it deserves and take it through a mature process and start planning that process now. It could be 2 years out from your exit, but when you plan now, you can line everything up so that it is in the most sellable state possible, and you can get the deal that you deserve and change your life.
Love that. Ben, what's the best way for people to connect with you and get to know about what you do?
Absolutely. You can email me, ben@ecombrokers.co.uk. It's a UK domain, but we operate internationally. Our website is ecombrokers.co.uk. And I'm on all social media channels at Ben Leonard Pro.
Love it. Ben, thank you once again. Insightful as always. And looking forward to having you the fourth time sometime down the road.
Cool. Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Thanks for listening to the E-commerce Profits Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get notified of future episodes.